We are listening with empathy today to the struggles of those who have been affected by mental illness. The title of our program today is Losing My Father to Schizophrenia. It's not a happy topic, but it's one that affects many of us. Let me tell you a little bit about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder characterized by hallucinations, which can be auditory or visual, and delusions, which are basically bizarre false beliefs, and social isolation. Subtypes of schizophrenia include catatonic, paranoid, and disorganized, so there are various manifestations of this thing. The prevalence of schizophrenia is surprisingly high. About 1% of the population suffers from this devastating illness. But the reality is that many of those people withdraw from society because one of the symptoms is withdrawal, and so often they end up living, homeless people. Many homeless are schizophrenic. And so there's a lot of that kind of factor. Schizophrenia is heritable, so we can see it in the family tree, so to speak, evidenced by the fact that first-order relatives are more often affected. So what about the prognosis and treatment of schizophrenia? Schizophrenia is not considered curable, although I've heard miracle stories, we all have, but it is manageable through antipsychotic medication, and sometimes lifestyle measures can help. And so it isn't a death sentence. When an individual is diagnosed with schizophrenia, there can be life after schizophrenia, but tragically not always. And so we want to hear the story today of Eric Camarillo. Thank you for joining us and talking about this very difficult part of your life, and you have a lot of courage to show up and be willing to open up and share for the benefit of others, because many are affected by this. So welcome, Eric. Eric is from Orlando. He's my homie in Orlando, where I just moved, and he runs SALT Ministries, so hopefully we'll be able to touch a little bit on what you're doing with that, because you have blessed a lot of people through that ministry. And today in our panel of counselors, we also have David Guerrero. He's a biblical counselor from Wisconsin. We have licensed professional counselor Christina Cecotto from Georgia, and Dr. Jean Wright from my hometown, before I moved to Orlando, of Philadelphia. So we're so thankful each one of you have come to our program today. And let's get right into the story, Eric. When did this begin? It's a tragic title, Losing My Father to Schizophrenia. He's still alive, but you lost him in terms of his presence in your life, emotionally, mentally. When did this begin?
Yeah, I was in second grade. I remember waking up one morning and walking to the living room, and my youngest brother, he was I think 2 at the time, and he was ripping up a note. And so when I walked up to him, I saw there was writing on the note. He pieced it together, and it was a note from my father. And he basically said in that note, I started to hear voices like my mother, and I think I might have what she has, schizophrenia.
So his mother had
Yes.
Okay.
How old was he?
He was in his late 20s. I want to say he was 28. 28, 29, something like that. And so yeah, so that happened. I went to my mom and, told her about it, and she was shocked. And I didn't know what to think. I was 8 years old. But
what did he actually say on the note?
He said something along the lines of, I have what my mother has, I think. I'm starting to hear voices. I checked myself into the hospital.
Okay.
So that's kind of the gist of what he said. And then from there, he came back. He tried to battle with it himself for a little while. He wasn't really fully convinced that he had it. Maybe he was in denial, but definitely wasn't consistent on medication at that time. And that's kind of when everything started.
So he's in his late 20s, I think you said, which is kind of what we call late onset, because typically males onset in early 20s and women onset in late 20s.
Yes.
But so he's late onset, he's starting to have a totally different personality, really, and you start having a totally different day-to-day experience with him than you ever had before.
Right.
So what are some of the changes?
Yeah, so we started, one big change is he became physically abusive. When he was in denial about his sickness, and so what he would do is he would hear something or maybe see something, and he would ask me and my brothers if we heard or said the same thing, but his doctor would tell us, hey, don't admit to hearing or seeing the things he's hearing or seeing, because it'll make him worse. So out of love for him, even though he'd get physically abusive if we denied it, we stuck true to, to that.
Let me ask you, Dr. Jean Wright, what would you tell a kid in that situation? Would you tell the kid to agree with the what would you do?
It's never safe or healthy to agree with a delusion.
Okay.
Okay, because then you're feeding into that delusion.
Yeah.
And so the doctor that gave him that advice was on point.
Yeah.
The problem is you're 8.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and your brothers are younger than you. You're the eldest of the
Right.
children.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's a difficult thing for children to carry out. But on the surface, that was the right advice for a doctor.
What would you say to do? Would you say just remain silent, or?
I think what Eric did, and you shared with us offline, that he protected his younger brothers by having them go out of the room and then tried to protect himself as best you could at 8.
Right.
And that's really all a child can do. But if an adult, your parent figure, is asking you directly, did you see or hear A, B, C, or D, you're really at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And so an older person could have a different answer.
My heart is just breaking for you in
Absolutely.
that moment. Little 8-year-old
Absolutely.
boy, and you're being forced by your dad almost to lie, and the other authority figures are saying don't lie, and
Right.
you're just you're going to get hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem with lying is if he admits to seeing or hearing the same thing, then a follow-up question comes.
Exactly.
You can't continue to.
And you just have
what
to
did you
keep.
see?
You
Right.
get swept away.
Right.
Well, the physical abuse is addressed by what Eric did. I mean, I'm amazed at your courage at 8 years old to first think of your brothers and the folks younger than you, and then to unfortunately have to take the brunt of it yourself. So, God bless you for that, and we're so glad you survived. But that is the thing. The physical abuse is something that is not typical of everyone that has schizophrenia.
Yeah,
So
we don't want to give the impression that they're all just violent.
Right.
Ready,
Right. No, he was physically abused as a child as
Yeah.
well. So I guess maybe
There's-
his defense was down when he got sick, and it just triggered everything.
Yeah.
Could you describe what Jean was explaining that had happened to you? What did you have to do to protect yourself specifically?
So when that would happen, I'd have my brothers go into a room, they'd lock the door. At least most of the time I would try to do that. My second youngest brother, he's autistic, and he also had ADHD. So it was hard for my dad to have patience with him as well. So there were some issues in me trying to defend him because it was a little harder. But when it came to me defending myself, I mean, he would we could tell when he's acting a little strange, when he's peeking out the window, or when he just kind of stared off into space, and then I would know, okay, it's about to come. So I tell my brothers to go hide, and I just hang out there, do my thing, and then eventually he would ask, and then that's when.
And you knew it was about to happen.
Yeah.
Now, was your mom aware?
I was just going to ask, where were the other adults in your life at this time?
Yeah. So my mom, my mom worked as a nurse, so she worked
Okay.
12-hour shifts, and she worked overnight. So it was she wasn't awake or there a lot of the time, and so, we would tell her. For a while she denied it, but yeah, it was just us and him.
We love you, Eric. Thank you for having the courage to talk about this. I know it's hard, but it's helping people out there that are struggling through the same things.
Absolutely.
So, where did it go from there?
So we dealt with that for a while till I was about 14, 15. And that's when I was, I actually had started working out, and part of that reason was to be able to defend myself. And so I was about at 14, and I actually learned how to box. As a 14-year-old, I'd go into my friend's basement, and we would learn. And I wasn't too open with a lot of my friends about what was going on. But yeah, and when I learned how to defend myself. And actually, around the same time, my dad had fell down the stairs, and he had tore a ligament, and so he was injured as well, and so it was a little easier to defend myself at that time, and he started to get less aggressive. But when we ended up moving to Florida. We were in Chicago at that time, and we moved to Florida. And when we first moved to Florida, it seemed like, for a temporary amount of time, there were no symptoms because he was convinced it was the neighbors at that time that were doing all this.
In Chicago?
In Chicago.
And then you moved to Florida and the neighbors are gone.
The neighbors were gone. But then temporarily until, you know, a couple months later, the neighbors again, and then it started all over again.
Did you ever have a break, like when he was on his medication, the symptoms were controlled? Were there ever any?
Even, and unfortunately, I know maybe this is just my case, but the medicine never really seemed to make a difference.
Really?
In my perspective, there was always, and who knows, maybe it would have been a lot worse if there wasn't.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, but
Or maybe it wasn't the right med, because
Do you know how
those
often
symptoms can be controlled.
Do you know how often they changed the medication, or was it always the same
yeah, they
medication?
changed the medication often. You know, my mom would always request, like, hey, you got to change this medication, that's not working.
Did you ever change diet or bring in any holistic, remedies or anything like that? Try anything like that?
So the one thing that did seem to work in my case was what you had mentioned. We actually, I did a lot of research, and in my own research, I noticed that gluten might affect symptoms, and I think it was a small percentage. I'm sensitive to gluten, so I'm like, okay, maybe, and I had to cut out gluten. I noticed the change in me, so I'm like, okay, maybe I got this from my dad. So let's try cutting out gluten, and let me put him on a plant-based diet. He had his worst episode at that time. I remember they had to drag him off. I mean, he thought my mom was a demon. He called me Jesus. You know, he thought everyone was just demons surrounding him. And
So he had the worst episode when he was off the gluten, or before?
No. This was before.
Okay.
He had this episode, and he went to the hospital. They changed his medication, and when he came out of the hospital, he had some clarity of mind for a second. And in that time, he told me, he's like, I want to lose weight. I'm like, okay, I can help you with that, and he was actually willing. I've always talked to him about eating healthier. When I became Adventist, I started to eat healthier.
You were an
myself.
Adventist at this point, so you had learned about the health message. Okay.
Exactly.
How old were you when you became an Adventist?
I was 22.
Okay, and you're still at home?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep. No, at that time, I'm sorry, no. At that time, I was at home for a year, but when this episode happened, I was moved out.
Okay.
Yeah, so he had that episode, he came out, he said, yes, I want to lose weight. I'm like, okay, let's change your diet. I can help you, I can teach you how to cook. We can go and take walks, sleeping's important. So we kind of did all that, and he continued on his medication. But after about, within a week, the symptoms were no longer there. He didn't hear anything, he didn't see anything, he wasn't paranoid. He was focused on just eating right. My mom even told me, we went out to the movies, and he actually went out, no issues. We watched the movie, we had a good conversations, and she felt for a moment that she had her husband back. This happened for about 3 months. 2 months was me going there every 2 days, and I cooked 4 meals, breakfast and dinner, and then breakfast and dinner, and then I come back the third day, do the same thing.
And he was getting his exercise,
He was getting his exercise. We go for walks every other day.
Now, you had described that before, that he wasn't able to watch movies. Could you describe a little bit about when he watched movies before, what would happen?
Oh yeah, when he watches TV, movies, even when my brothers are playing a video game in the living room, anything that has any kind of sound like someone talking,
External stimulus.
He starts to hear other things, and so.
But he wasn't hearing those things.
He wasn't hearing those things. It was just a normal, it was just regular. And so for 2 months, I did the cooking and preparing, food prep. And then the next month, I had figured he'd know how to do it himself, and he did. He was cooking himself. I bought them a crock pot, a juicer, all these different things. Yeah. And so, but after that 3rd month, he started to relapse. He ate meat again. And that escalated more and more into him eating more and more unhealthier food, and the symptoms came back.
Okay, so it wasn't the meat alone. It was eating.
It was just an unhealthy
diet.
Lifestyle. Okay. Eating too frequently, but. And
he was quite overweight, you said.
What about?
He was overweight in that period of time, in that 3-month period. He lost, if I'm not mistaken, between 60 and 70 pounds.
Wow.
He no longer had to take his type 2 diabetes medication. He had diabetes at that time, and his blood pressure was normalized. And it was a huge change, because not only did the symptoms go away from schizophrenia, but all those other things.
And so, this is the thing we wrestle with. We like natural methods. We like remedies and things that you can do at home, And we like to avoid medication if possible,
Amen.
because it always has side effects, almost always. And yet, with schizophrenia, we find it's a battle to keep people on the medication. And so what you're saying is that the medication didn't seem to work very well, or if it did, it wasn't working as fully as you would have liked it. And the lifestyle measures brought in really made a difference. So this is how we roll as mental health providers that believe in health, is that we think medication is sometimes necessary, but we like to supplement it with as many lifestyle
Absolutely.
measures as
Right.
possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you listen, well, as I was listening, this is what I heard, that yes, he did the exercise, yes, he engaged in the right diet, rest, but he continued to take his medication.
Yep. Throughout that time, he continued to take
So
his
that was
medication.
part of the regimen,
And so-
and that's what helped.
Yeah,
team.
and I know that there's, there are schools of thought out there that say, oh, stop the medication and do this. But
They've never lived with someone with schizophrenia.
yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and I don't know, if, one thing is when you're eating a healthy, high nutrient diet, it helps to neutralize the medication anyway in itself. It kind of balances it out, and that's my understanding based on what I've read.
Yeah.
And that might not be, but I know particular psychotic medication, antipsychotic medication seems to balance each other out, but that's my...
That's absolutely true.
Okay.
And I think the good thing about eating a high nutrient diet is that it really mitigates many other things that you've mentioned. And so it helped with the schizophrenia, but as Jennifer has mentioned as well, it helps overall body chemistry and overall mental or mind chemistry, the cognitive functioning,
Right.
and the ability to think. That frontal lobe area is replenished, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that is really important, and I know you've talked about it many times.
For me, I mean, I go down, I have a history of depression, and I go down very seldom these days, but when I go down hard, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. But I know, because of years of experience, that in about 3 days, my brain chemistry will kick in and correct itself. But during that 3-day period, I'm exercising, I'm reaching out for help, I'm connecting with people, I'm reading uplifting literature, I'm eating extra healthy, all the things that
that's
are going to
definitely
minister to that
necessity.
recovery process.
Absolutely.
But typically what people do when they go down or they start suffering or being in distress is they start junk food eating or binge watching, crummy
That only
media,
exasperates the part.
or isolating from people.
What have you done to kind of make sure that, I'm sure there's some kind of element of fear there that it could potentially happen to you. Have you done anything to make sure that doesn't happen, or have you researched that?
Yeah, so I actually researched it when I was 14. I had just started high school, and I realized, like, hey, this could happen to me, and not only to me, but to my brother. So I need to know how to, because he has it, my aunt has it, another uncle has it, so and his mother had it, so it's there. And so as a 14-year-old, I wasn't Christian at the time either. I'm just like, okay, what can I do? And so I researched and found that the 3 major triggers, and again, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3 major triggers are: 1, drug abuse, any mind-altering drug; 1 is isolation, and another one is a highly stressful event. And when all 3 of those are combined, the percentage is very high if it runs in your family. If it's just 1, it's a little lower. 2, it's higher. But with all 3, you're almost there.
And
Triggered.
aren't street drug use, doesn't that often trigger the first psychotic episode? Like that's like onset is when someone took LSD or
A specific type of illicit drug is really important. You mentioned LSD, any type of hallucinogen, period, obviously.
and
would be,
pot, right? I mean, isn't there
it
some?
can be a hallucinogen.
It's kind of a hallucinogen,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think the stress aspect is one that if you would explore a little more with us, because we live in a world of stress, and I often tell people that there's 3 main areas of stress: people, places, and things. So where do we go, right? And so having that predisposition from a genetic standpoint is one thing, but I think you hit on some things, if you would share with our audience, how you've helped your dad at the time and yourself and your brothers mitigate some of the stress that you're dealing with.
So, I'm the only Christian in my family. But I believe strongly that when I became a Christian, those 3 factors were no longer relevant. They were no longer a risk, if you will.
But wait a minute, don't Christians experience stress?
Yes, yep. I'm glad you pointed that out.
But you're handling it a different
And so
way.
here's where the stress comes in.
You're stressing me out right now.
Here's where the stress comes in is believing in God and believing that and putting my faith in Him, you know, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, God is described as the God of all comfort.
Amen.
And he can comfort us from all our tribulations. And so, you know, I reach out for that comfort when I'm stressed, and I'm able to be comforted knowing that, hey, Romans 8:28 says, for all things that happen are for the good of those who love God.
And now look where you are.
Right, you know, and so, you know, it's been a journey, but yeah, as far as stress goes, now for my family, that's another thing. I mean, my brother, for example, my youngest brother, I'm worried about him the most. And the reason why I'm worried is because he's in isolation. He does things that alter the mind. He's always stressed out, you know, being around my dad and being, you know, and so there was a time where he was 21 years old, he was in the house, and he wasn't doing anything. I mean, all he would do is play video games, and that would be it. And so I remember, you know, I remember one day telling him, look, you know, because he was depressed, and I'm like, look, come to my house for a week. Stay with me for a week. If we'll apply for 3 jobs a day, and if you do not find a job in that time, then you can keep doing whatever you're doing. The first job we applied for, the first day he got. He worked at Golden Corral as a dishwasher. Okay. And now I got him a job. I worked at Whole Foods for a while. I got him a job at Whole Foods. He got $3.50 raise.
Amen.
And so now he's working. He's feeling confident. He's building his self-confidence, and he's around people now. You know, so it's helping, but I can only do so much. It really depends on
You
that.
are an awesome big brother, don't you
Yes,
guys think?
praise
You're
the
an
Lord.
awesome son.
Yes,
He is.
absolutely.
Really.
Praise the Lord.
I could be better.
So tell us
I think we all
briefly.
can.
We don't have a lot of time, but you have really made major lemonade out of a lemon here, and started a ministry of your own to, you know, a population. I mean, I just served with a homeless ministry, and a lot of that population is people with mental illness.
Right.
So you've really ministered to people out of your pains. Tell us just briefly about SALT Ministries.
Yeah, so SALT Outreach, it's an acronym for Service and Love Together. And just briefly, the reason why we started was because we saw a lack of, in Orlando there's so many Adventist churches, and we saw a lack of unity in purpose, in purpose, as far as, you know, each church kind of doing their own thing. The other thing was we saw a lack of outreach projects going on, and if we did see outreach, like practical outreach projects going on, we didn't see relationships being built. It wasn't consistent. So as SALT, we wanted to be able to, we created a network of outreach projects. They're led by young adults. We have a network of growth groups led by young adults. And the umbrella of SALT, we're able to provide volunteer management resources, fundraising resources, different things to support our outreach projects, so that the leaders themselves, the young adults, they don't have to worry about volunteer management. We can help with that. So that's kind of, and one of our projects, as you mentioned, is with the homeless population. We work at a Section 8 complex with the kids and the families, and also at the hospital.
It was just last Sabbath that I was with you.
Yes.
It was incredible, like 100 or so homeless people, and we gave them breakfast, and then we gave them a lunch, and they were so happy and so pleased, and there were so many volunteers there, and there was such a great spirit, you know.
Right.
It was amazing because, Eric, earlier on you said that you wanted to do whatever you could do to avoid from getting into the same situation as your father. And what's powerful is that in Ellen White's writings in Ministry of Healing, on the chapter of Mind Cure, you know, she says there's some things that we should do, but one thing that she talks about is service. She said we should look to serve others.
Absolutely.
And God has worked in your experience that in your pain, you made a choice and you said, I'm going to serve others. You know, you've served your father, you served your brother, you've served your mother. Now you're serving the community and the world.
Amen.
And through that, the Holy Spirit is working through you, and He's keeping your mind in Christ.
No,
And that's
God.
beautiful.
Praise God. Yeah, it was definitely Him, because if I hadn't entered that relationship with Him,
Amen.
I don't know where I'd be right now, to be honest.
Yeah.
I might have had it. I don't know.
We don't know either.
So
We're
all
like
things
going,
work
"Whoa."
together for the good.
Yeah, that's right.
And as you're serving God, as you're serving Christ, He's keeping your mind
I
in
believe
Him.
that. I believe that.
What would you
His mind
say to
stable.
someone
Amen.
who's got a first-order relative with schizophrenia?
I would say keep trying. I keep trying to, you know, keep praying, keep that relationship, it's hard. You have to have so much patience. My mom has dealt with my dad. I mean, they never divorced. My mom stuck there throughout the whole time. And so
He's still alive.
he's still alive. My mom is still still with him, living with him, and it's stressful for her. You know, and she has to deal with his episodes all the time. And so, but I would say, you know, don't give up. You know, because if we gave up, my dad would be homeless right now. But to have him around and to it still gives us hope. You know, that maybe, you know, maybe one day, you know, he'll get better. But at the end of the day, if he doesn't, in heaven, he'll
get
have
his
a
brain
right
back.
mind.
Amen.
He'll have a right mind. He'll be the dad that I knew before, second grade and before. And I look forward to that day. You know, that's the day I look forward to.
Now, you had
Praise the
said
Lord.
that you also, you know, for those who could potentially also develop schizophrenia, that you had done a few things. I know you already mentioned some of them, but one of the things that you hadn't mentioned yet that we were talking about offset was the caffeine and the effects on the brain. I don't know if you already talked about that, but what you had said really impressed me. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, just very quickly. Yeah, caffeine is definitely a mind-altering drug as well. I consider that a drug. It cuts off blood flow to the brain, constricts the blood vessels. So definitely that is...
Which is why it works for headaches.
Right.
Yeah, because the headaches are too much blood in the brain. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, that right there is something that I cut out right away. I had to go through withdrawal from that, but I was drinking like 5 cups a day.
And it affects dopamine levels, and schizophrenia is dopamine related. So
Exactly.
it was a good, I think, a wise choice. I think particularly for people with mental illness, they need to be very, you know, people without that issue may be able to take a little bit of caffeine once in a while, but it quickly becomes an addiction. I wish everybody would avoid it, but particularly people with mental illness.
Right.
Well, this has been fascinating and very, very helpful. Eric, thank you so much, and thank you each one of the panel members. He's the God of all comfort, and
Amen.
He comforts us so that we can comfort others with the same comfort wherewith we were comforted of God. And we've heard a story today from a young man who took a tragic situation with his father with schizophrenia, and he is serving out of that pain and difficulty, serving others, many of the same population that is his father. And so we're so grateful to see an example of love in action and what God can do with a life fully dedicated to Him.